soft like flower dew. Sure, I know that your stem has a story. Melodies seem to form inside of you. The flow of your body drips soft like flower dew. Sure, I know that your stem
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. Hello, Great Britain. Hello, world. And welcome to Effie Barker Human Interest. I'm your host, Effie Barker. I'm a Filipino American immigrant who is married to an Englishman. I moved here in the UK in 2019, now living in Portsmouth, in Hampshire, with our 3-year-old daughter. I'm a former TV host and reporter in Los Angeles, California. And today's episode, I will be talking to an American immigrant who is originally from Los Angeles, California. She moved here in the year 2000. She is married to an Englishman and she became British citizen in 2019. Let's listen to her journey here in the UK and her life here as an American immigrant. Let us welcome Karen McMahon. Hello, Karen. How are you?
Hello, Effie. Very much for having me.
Right. Thank you so much for being here in the show and for squeezing us. I know you are a very busy person. I'm glad that you gave us this opportunity to speak with you and to tell your story. The $1 million question first. Give me a little bit of a background. Before you moved here in the UK, you were in Los Angeles. Were you working? How old were you at the time? Give us a picture.
Yes, so I was in my early 30s and I was living and working in Los Angeles. I had been away working abroad for a few years and I went back to Los Angeles as I was a creative recruiter during the dot-com boom. And unemployment was really low. Being a recruiter was really great, and I got headhunted by a competing business. And I realized that I had had a lot of reverse culture shock moving back to the Los Angeles area, and I didn't want to be there anymore. So when I got this job offer, I said I would come and work for them. It was a multinational company. I said I'll work for you if you move me to Europe, because I felt like I had more European sensibilities at that time. So, um, and they did, because people were in demand, and you gave them, if you found somebody that was worth their while, you gave them what they wanted. Um, so I moved to Manchester, England, to work for an international creative recruitment agency. And that was November 2000, so 24 years, almost 24 years. And I lived in Manchester by myself. I moved to the UK, didn't have any friends, family, or a partner at that time. And I was an Anglophile, so I I loved it, but it was a difficult move. Very, even though we share a language, it's not the same country. Obviously, coming from Los Angeles to dreary old England, rain and clouds and cold, and I didn't have a car. You have to take a train, and the trains are always late, and all of that stuff. It was a difficult few years. Eventually, I moved to the south of England, to Bristol, where I work now, and I've been here since then, and met my husband down here.
Okay. So you were in your 30s from
Yes,
Los Angeles and you work for, was that creative recruitment?
yes,
And
yes.
for
So I
somebody, hmm,
I I recruited designers, copywriters, salespeople for advertising agencies, that marketing people, that kind of people.
yeah. Did you have your own house back then, or were you with your parents, or you were
No,
alone?
I was a Los Angeles renter, like everyone at
Yes.
that time. I was renting. I lived in Brentwood, uh, and yeah, and flat sharing or living on my own, just depending on the situation or when it was happening. But it wasn't until I moved to the UK that I was able to buy my own home.
Mhm, mhm,
But it was much easier to do it here. Back then, I don't think it's as easy now, but it was much easier to get on the housing ladder
mhm.
in
So
the UK.
you had no children at then, you were in your 30s, you were
Yeah,
renting, and it's really free available to leave the
get
country.
up and go, and I did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Were you
I got a job offer on the 19th of October, and I was in the UK on the 20th of November, so
mm,
I really
wow,
packed up and left very quickly.
the accuracy of the dates, you know? Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I've got that kind of I don't know where my car keys are, but I can tell you what I was wearing, that day
right.
probably.
So what was it? Did you know did you know before or had an interest already to leave the United States? What was the attraction? Was it you were bored of or you just happened to have an opportunity?
It was a combination, I didn't feel, Los Angeles is, obviously it's so everything is about the entertainment industry, and I was never interested in the entertainment industry, and everyone you meet is trying to achieve something in that world, and it just didn't feel like it had that pull for me anymore. Um, so I wanted to go, and I like I was living in an apartment. I didn't have anything that was holding me down. So when the opportunity came, I took it. I was an Anglophile. I loved the Beatles, and I loved Jane Austen, and all of that stuff. So I was following some fantasy that didn't turn out to be exactly what I was thinking it was going to be.
Mhm.
But that's why I did it.
So you really had an interest already on England to begin with.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
mm, but you didn't plan it before. It just happens to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If they had offered me a job at that point in my life, if they had offered me a job in Munich, I probably would have taken it. I was
Mm.
just looking for a way out of the United States.
Oh, okay. You wanted to leave the country.
Yeah, I think I my family had I don't have immediate brothers and sisters. So I didn't really have that kind of tie. My mother had passed away when I was a teenager. My father had moved back to Spain, and I didn't want to live in Spain. So, but there was nothing really that was holding me back there.
Mhm. So you said you have a brother. How many siblings do you have?
I have two half brothers and a half
Oh,
sister, but this is from my father's previous relationship. So I was never really close to them.
mm,
I was essentially an only child.
I see. And your parents were both from Spain?
Yeah, so my mother was from Madrid, my father was from Jerez de la Frontera,
Mm,
uh, but my mother went to university in Mexico, so she
okay,
also had quite an affinity uh, to Mexico, and when she left university, she moved to Los Angeles.
I see. You kind of have a fluency in speaking of that word earlier. Do you speak Spanish?
It's my first language. Yeah, it's my
Okay.
first language. So, but, you know, uh, maybe like some parents use iPads with their children now. My mother used television for me when I was a baby, and she
Mm-hmm.
would, as soon as I could sit down by myself, she would sit me in front of the TV. From the moment my father would go to work until he would come home, I would be in front of the TV 24, like 8 hours a day. So I think I sound like people on TV, so I don't have an accent.
Oh,
When, my parents had accents, my brothers had accents, but I don't because I sounded like people on television. So,
right.
yeah,
What were you watching? Just kids show, cartoons?
everything, everything. I think old movies, kids
Mm.
shows, cooking shows. I remember there was a cooking show in the late 60s, 70s called the Galloping Gourmet that had a British chef. And that was my favorite cooking when I was little. I wanted to have a cooking show. So, but yeah, so I would watch everything. I just would watch TV all day long. I Love Lucy.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. The reason why I ask is I have a biracial daughter as well, and I let her watch all the Philippines. She speaks Tagalog now and my regional language as well, in
Yeah,
Bisaya. But yes, she got it from TV as well. She kept watching the YouTube, but yeah, she's interested with news. She watches the parliament debate and stuff.
that's
But
amazing. That's really good for her. But
yeah,
this is, this is the age. She's going to absorb everything.
she
So
does.
yeah, absolutely.
So you moved here in the UK. Take us back into the time where you how was the application for your visa? Were you sponsored?
So yeah, so when I moved over, I came over on a work permit um, from the company I was working for. And I realized very quickly that if they wanted to make me redundant, then I would lose the right to be here.
Mhm.
So within my first year, I applied uh, on my own for an HSMP visa. It was a highly skilled migrant program scheme, I think it was called. And at that point, the only thing that you needed, or the highest level of education that you needed, was a master's degree, and it could be a master's in anything. Whereas now, I think those types of visas, you have to have, like PhDs in something
Mhm.
technological or scientific. So within a year of being here, I took a sabbatical from my job and didn't work for 6 months while the application was processed. And yeah, it took about 6 or 7 months for it to happen. But then I had the visa that was basically with my, on my own, so I could work anywhere. And I had that for 3 years. But when that was running out, by the time that ran out, then the requirements were much higher. So my master's degree was no longer enough.
Oh,
Um, and so I had to then revert back a uh, to a work permit. So I had to get sponsored again. So it was a lot of back and forth for probably the first 6, 7 years that I was here. Um, Doing, work visas and so on. It was awful. And, and you think I'm paying taxes, but I'm not really anybody. Your passport says you're not eligible for
mm,
anything. And it's a very unsteadying time,
mhm,
you being an immigrant, thinking that, you've got a good job, you've got a good life, but you're still not one of them, because you've got this immigrant status. Um, it's not nice. It's not a nice feeling. And then I eventually transferred everything to a spousal visa when I got married. But then you're jumping through different hoops.
right.
I'm, during that time as well. And that was really why I became a British citizen, not because um, I mean, I'm proud to be a British citizen, and I'm glad that I'm here. But it wasn't that pride that made me become a British citizen. I just did not want the fear of what if something goes wrong. You know, an indefinite leave to remain visa that you have.
Mhm,
When you're a spouse, it says indefinite leave to remain, but it's not really indefinite. If I had gone abroad and had a car accident and was unable to travel back, um, after a year, you lose that.
right.
And a lot of people don't know that.
Yes. But the first time you came, when you went for the work, was that easy? I'm assuming the company processed everything.
Mm. Yeah, it was. It was very easy. Like I think I said at the beginning, it was. in 2000, unemployment, I don't remember what the percentage was, but unemployment in the United States was really, really low.
Mhm.
And it was difficult to find people. And you promised, and I was a recruiter, so I knew what kinds of things we used to have to promise people. And you could bring anybody from anywhere, if they were coming for a job, you could get them a work permit. And the
Mm.
same was here. So because I was coming to work for, it was an American company based in Boston, but they had their European headquarters in the UK. They were able to get me a visa, very easily.
Okay.
So within
So
5 weeks, I had it.
okay, very quick then.
Yeah,
Yeah. Tell me how you feel at that time. Were you excited? You excited you're moving to the UK, you're
I
single
was.
and
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect. The thing that I was most worried about at the time was how cold it was going to be, because I
yeah,
had never lived in a very, very cold climate.
Los
So I was really
Angeles.
worried. Yeah, exactly. So I didn't know what to expect. So I moved here with like 5 coats and everything, all the shopping that you had to do. Um, I didn't even know where I was going to live when I first moved here. I moved into rented a combination that my company had gotten for me for the first 3 months while I looked for something. And the housing is completely different. I moved into a terraced house, like the little brick ones that you see on TV, and it was just completely different. These little boxes
Mhm.
that you lived in, but yeah, it was exciting. But it was, you know, I had to learn about how
Mhm.
at that point you could not go
Yeah.
to a supermarket
Mhm.
on a Sunday at 5 o'clock because they were closed.
Yes. So,
So it was
yeah,
different.
when you got here, it's all, of course, everything was exciting. You had no responsibility other than yourself, and you're single, your job, everything was arranged on your visa. Um, so you said that you didn't know what to expect. So did you not research anything at all, or you have any expectation what life you would have when you get here?
Not really. I had some British friends in Los Angeles, but none of them were from Manchester. They all told me the image that they gave me of Manchester was something from the revolution in the 1800s. That it was all
Mhm.
factories and smog, and
Mm.
it was a very dreary city. And it wasn't like that at all, actually. Manchester was I still love Manchester. It's a great city, and there wasn't very much diversity. That was something that I missed being from Los Angeles. There was, like I said, I speak Spanish. I very rarely at that point ran into people who were Spanish speaking. Now
Mhm.
there are a lot of Spaniards who came over, after the crash in 2007. A lot of Spaniards and Europeans moved to the UK, and a lot of them have stayed. But at that point, it was years before I spoke in Spanish to anyone. I used to have to talk in Spanish to my cat so I could keep practicing. But yeah, it was very, very different. A big city, and I didn't want to move to another big city, and Manchester is a really big city. Bristol is much more manageable.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but it was beautiful. Lots of history and the countryside, and it was.
Mhm.
Yeah, I loved my time there.
Tell me about your experience of when you moved here. Like, how did the local community and your interactions to your local community? Tell me about your experiences.
Well, in in while I was at work, because I worked for an American company, being an American was not that big of a deal to them. But at that point, I used to work doing new business, and I realized that because my voice was different to everyone else, it was really easy to get in to making phone calls to people. Where in sales, it's usually hard to get your phone call taken from everybody. But I think because I was American, people thought that it was something official or something important, and I had a lot of doors open for me. And so I used it for a really long time. That was a really great benefit. And then locally, I was living in a small Lancashire village, and people are very, very private. They don't talk to each other, or they don't let people in as easily. And that was harder, but people knew who I was. And I'll give you an example. There was one night that a friend and I went to a pub, and we had to get a taxi home because we were a little drunk. And we took the taxi home, and I said to my friend in the morning, "Did you pay the taxi?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, I didn't pay the taxi." She's like, "No, no, you didn't." And I said, "Well, how did we get home? Did you give him the address?" And she was like, "No, I didn't have the address." And I realized that he knew who I was because I was the American woman in the village that everybody knew, and everyone knew where I lived, even though
Mm-hmm.
he didn't know me. So he
Mm-hmm.
just dropped me off at home. And the next day he came and knocked on my door to ask for the money for the taxi ride because he didn't ask us for it. And I said to him, "How did you know where I lived?" And he said, "I didn't." He said, "But I called the dispatcher and I said it's this American woman, and the dispatcher told him, 'Oh, she lives over here.'" So they all knew who I was. So obviously they were all talking about me. Um, but it
And that's
wasn't
yeah.
wasn't
Sorry,
very
that's like
friendly.
really scary for us, if
I
we're from the
know. Yeah, yeah. But at least we got home, I guess. But
right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting times.
Yeah. So you think that there is advantage or disadvantage of being an American here?
There was then. I don't know about it now. I mean, I think I may have told you that I helped modify an Americans in Bristol group on Facebook, and
Mm-hmm.
um, there are a lot of people who I think find it really difficult to make friends, and have relationships in the UK, because they're American, because people don't seem to want to let them in. And I don't know if it's the politics of the United States now, and that people don't want to associate themselves with that. They think that we're either too conservative or too liberal. It's one or the other. There's no middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was easier 20 years ago than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of people that I find who really, really struggle um, making connections in the UK. I don't know if it was like that for you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's not. I think I'm the kind of person though that if I sit at a bus bench, whoever's sitting next to me, I start talking to them. Um,
Yes.
but if you're not that way, but you could also put people off if you do that. A lot of British people would be like, "Who are you talking to me? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Go away." So I think it depends, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's not easy
Were they friendly? We're talking about
always.
time that you just moved here. Was
Always.
your local community friendly to you because you're American?
I think they were just friendly because they were northern. So I think people in the north are just uh, they're a very sort of friendly people
Mm-hmm.
anyway. I don't think that they would have invited me to their home, but they were always polite. Where I think
Mm.
people in the South are, it's kind of like that New York, Los Angeles thing where people in New
Uh-huh.
York are like, "I have no time for you." And I think
Yes.
people in the South are very much like that.
Right.
And people in the North were always friendly. I don't think it was because I was American. It's just because they were friendly, but they were
Yeah.
not going to just open their doors to me. um, I always had to have an entry by a colleague
Mm.
or somebody else I had met. Um, you know, I started to do volunteering,
Mm.
and that I got to meet like-minded people that way. But otherwise, it would have been much harder, I think, to make friends or to let people into their personal life.
Right. When we come back, Karen will talk to us about the length of time in getting her visa, the fees that's involved, and her experience in interacting with her community and her plans now that she is a British American citizen. Keep it here on Love the Beat Radio.